My story begins with the mom's side of the family in 1955, when my Italian grandfather and grandmother were born. Let's start with my grandmother. Her name is Maria Paravano, and she was born September 30th, 1955, in Castropignano, Italy. Maria didn't serve or help out in any wars, but her father did serve in the Italian military for 3 years. He also fought in World War II. My grandmother lived a rough life in Italy. She lived in a small home on a farm, which is located in a small village that was isolated from many big cities. There were not many jobs you can get in that town. Her family was massive. She had a total of 7 siblings, but only her mother was there because her father eventually died of a sickness. This made it hard for her mother to take care of all the children. Even though they lived on a farm, her family was not very wealthy, they were mostly poor, and they did not have much food to feed all the males in the family. My grandmother didn't enjoy this life in Italy, so she decided that once she was old enough, she would move to Canada. After thinking about it for a while, her mind was set on Canada as her only destination to travel to because of all the good things she was hearing, which ranged from a good and better lifestyle, in her case, and the large amount of job opportunities. Until then, she would live with her aunt to get away from all the problems for a short period of time. During that time, she tried to live a normal life and did a lot of babysitting so she could make money for her travels to Canada. Every once in a while, my grandmother would go back to her house and help on the farm. Once Maria turned 17 and had enough money to leave, she decided it was finally time to immigrate to Canada. She flew and arrived in Toronto on January 19th, 1973. Many other Italians also immigrated to Canada during this time. It was considered the third largest wave of Italian immigration to Canada. Even though my grandmother had a better life in Canada, she still faced many challenges. Maria's biggest challenge was learning English language, and it wasn't easy for her. It took her a long time to grasp it. She slowly learned English at her work, watching TV, and reading. But through that process, she was discriminated by some people in public and at work because she could barely speak or understand English. Maria was used to the warm weather in Italy, so when she came to Canada, she had to adapt to the weather, mostly winters. Eventually, she got used to Canada's weather and climate. When my grandmother arrived in Canada, she only knew one person, which was her brother. Since she knew no one else, she slowly began to make friends at work and began meeting new people. Maria ended up getting married at the age of 17 on March 10th, 1973. She was married for quite a while, but eventually she divorced in 1986. During the time she was married, she had 2 kids, my mom and my uncle. My mother, Christiana Dietrich, was born on April 25th, 1974, and my uncle, Anthony Maddalena, was born May 13th, 1980. When Maria divorced, she had to take care of my mom and uncle on her own while holding 3 jobs until she met my present grandfather. She only dropped one job because my grandfather had a well-paying job. In the end, my grandmother made a good choice by immigrating to Canada. Then, there's my grandfather. His name is Carlo Paravano, and he was born on April 29th, 1955, in Frosinone, Italy. My grandfather had a completely different family and lifestyle in Italy compared to my grandmother. His life was basically the complete opposite. His family was much smaller, and he only had 2 other siblings. His family lived in a bigger house and could afford to eat well. They also had a lot of money. One thing they had in similar was that both of their fathers contributed in war. My grandfather's father didn't serve on the front lines. He served in the back lines as a camp as a cook in the camps. He served during World War II in northern Italy. Eventually, Carlos' parents got tired of Italy and how the jobs were, so they were thinking about immigrating to a new country with a good amount of job opportunities. His family had 2 choices, either Australia or Canada. Australia was an option because of their open immigration policies, but my grandfather's family ended up choosing Canada. Canada was also accepting immigrants at the time, but the main reason they chose it was because he already had family living there, and they said many good things about Canada. Carlos' family arrived in Toronto, Canada, in May 1966. Moving to Canada, Carlo faced many challenges, like learning English, discrimination, and the weather. But by far his biggest challenge was learning English. In Italy, he was in grade 6, but once they moved to Canada, they moved him back to grade 3 because he could barely speak or understand English, and sometimes he was made fun of in classes for barely knowing any English. Even though he was set back, he continued school till grade 11. That was the year he dropped out of school because English became too hard for him to pass. His English did improve over the years, though. It improved throughout his years of school, watching a lot of TV, and him constantly reading the daily newspaper. Eventually, Carlo's ability to understand and speak English became really well. Moving from Canada to Italy, from Italy to Canada, there was a big change in the type of weather that occurred. Every season in Canada was colder than it was in Italy, especially in winter. My grandfather eventually became used to the different weather. 3 years went by, and Carlo went on to get his interview for his first job. At that time, he was 14. His duties were to deliver pop. He only worked on weekends since he was in school during the week. Since my grandfather was an immigrant and lived in a pretty big city, the jobs he worked in were mostly factory jobs. As he got older and his English got better, Carlo began to work in jobs like shoe factories, paper mills, full-time delivering pop, tourism companies, and many other jobs. He did say that he faced some discrimination during that time because of the way that English portrayed the immigrants. Also, his English wasn't perfect yet, so some people were still negative towards him. He worked a total of 7 jobs. Now, fast forward a couple years to 1989, when Carlo met Maria. They were together for 2 years and then married in 1991. At the age of 40, Carlo could no longer work. He injured himself one too many times to continue working. He could no longer provide as much support to his family of three, 2 teens and his wife. My grandmother, Maria, had to take on 2 jobs to continually bring in money, and it is still like that today. They lived in Rexdale at first, but moved to Woodbridge. They made that move because Woodbridge was more Italian, and most of the people living there were also Italian, which made my grandparents, uncle, and mother feel much more comfortable. That's it about my grandparents. But as the years went by, my mother and uncle began to grow older. They did not have to deal with or face the same challenges as my grandparents did growing up. They had a much easier life. My mother played some sports in high school, such as soccer and track. In the year 1998, at the age of 24, my mother met my father, Kevin Deachman. They were together for 3 years and married on May 21st, 2000. 1 year after that, I came into the picture. I was born on October 1st, 2001. I was born at Humber River Memorial in Western Ontario. I was raised in a small town named Nobleton throughout my whole life. I still live there today. I went to Nobleton Public School for kindergarten to grade 8 and am currently attending BCSS for my 4 years of high school. The sport that I used to get into school was soccer. Soccer is my favorite sport to play and watch. I have been playing soccer since I was 4 years old, and I still am till this day. I've played for many clubs, but my current one is Woodbridge. In conclusion, my family had a challenging life in the beginning, but as we went forward in generations, life became much more simpler. This is my place in Canadian history.